Gonna get started? Hello, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. We hope you had good conversations. For those of you who were in the round tables, it looked very spirited, and that's always amazing. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being you. I always love first-timers who come into the session and talk about how unique this community is, how inviting, how supportive, and how warm it is. And I love the fact that that perpetuates through everything else. So thank you all for continuing to foster that with us. This next session, To Build or to Buy, might not seem super sexy, but there. Wait till you see our speakers. Wait till you have the conversation, because this is one of those things that makes AMEC unique as well. We represent a broader spectrum of the ecosystem between comms, tech, monitoring, evaluation, and all of those pieces. And the very common conversation is always, should we buy a solution? Should we build a solution? It's an age-old debate. I don't think we're going to solve it here, but we are going to expand perspective, hopefully, around a lot of the industry and around the participants for the summit today. So it is a pleasure to welcome to the stage Allison Spray and Kyle Mason, who will be our experts du jour and have a lot of experience in this most recently around some of the pitfalls and the challenges. And there you go. Thank you. So, Allison, I think you're going to go through and kind of set this up for us before we start the conversation. So I will turn it over to you.
Thanks. So yeah, I thought I'd do a little bit of scene setting before we really get started with the conversation about why we're here, why we're talking about this from the agency and the in-house perspective, to build or to buy, and how that discussion has really evolved, particularly in the past 18 months. Part of this is just the speed of change in our industry. I know I do not need to tell all of you this, but the pace of tech advancement is just phenomenal. 90% of the world's data was generated in the last 2 years, and you could have said the same stat 2 years before that. So I'll let you all do the maths of how much information that is. The CPU power to train these different AI models that we've been talking about over the course of today is doubling every 6 months. All of these are the things that everyone, whether you're in-house, in a data partner, or in an agency, we're all thinking about as we start to consider what does the future of our business look like. The other things to keep in mind is that AI has changed the game, but maybe not for the reason you think. A lot of what we're talking about now is actually how you need to have data at your fingertips and the kind of data you need to have at your fingertips, because I think a lot of us have spent our careers trying to get summary statistics, trying to get to that high-level figure, and to build the reports like Johnny was talking about this morning that let us see that one killer stat. But to make use of AI, we actually need to have really detailed data. And this is something that we ran into at Hale & Noughton over the past years. We've been building out the Fount, which is our measurement solution, because we found actually a lot of the tools we'd been using to get media data weren't sufficient, because we needed to have text-level data. So it's a real game changer in terms of how we think about building and buying and our strategies around that. And the last piece, which I'll fully credit Oxford University for, is this concept of every company being a data company. Because increasingly, as we think about different revenue streams and diversifying what our businesses do, every company is sitting on a treasure trove of information about their customers, about the world, and you can start to see a lot of companies pivoting into data-first strategies for their revenue. So with all of that said, we have 3 themes to talk about today, which John is going to very kindly ask us some questions around: the relevance of when we buy, when we build, how we start to articulate value, and of course, because it's an AMEC conference, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about impact.
Yeah, we would probably get booed off of the stage if we actually tried to omit that. So, saving the best for last. That's how we roll. So thank you. I think that is important context, and I think it also helps people who are closely related to it to understand the perspective that you have of, yes, it's faster. That doesn't make it easier,
no.
Right? It's comes with its own challenges. But Kyle, I wanna start with you. When you and your team are looking at considerations of the investment, and it is an investment. I mean, no matter what, we talk about to build or to buy. It isn't just the bottom line, but it's the training, it's the skills adaptation. It's so many pieces that go into that are all cost related, that don't show up the same way on a P&L. So how do you and the team at Shell kind of go through and evaluate that to determine what's really relevant to the core business that makes it the most efficient solution for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in my role at Shell, I sit in-house within the corporate relations function, and we've got a mix of building or buying in that sense. So we've got an in-house team of analytics specialists. They focus on news media, social media intelligence, polling of the public, stakeholders, but also internal communications. There's also really important data source that we look at. And so, but that team is limited, right? There's only a certain number of people that we have on staff, and then we rely on a pretty big network of agency partners that are also specialists in what they do. It was really interesting seeing Johnny's tech stack earlier this morning. I love looking at people's tech stack because I like to see the commonalities between them. I like to see and assess whether there are certain things that we could do better. But it's not quite as big. We don't have quite as many partners as that. But when we're assessing sort of who does what work, in my team, we really focus on being in-house. We have great knowledge of the business strategy, what we're trying to achieve, and also what the business can change. So when we have sort of people come to us with research requests, we spend a lot of time building on some of the basic principles of the AMEC framework. What are you really trying to do, and what can you influence? And we're in a unique situation where we have more people coming to us than we have the time to process those requests. So we prioritize them based on potential business impact. So I will ask questions like, what are you going to do with that information? What decision will it influence? Is there already a decision board set up to deal with that? And what can you actually change in your role? And if you can't, who's the person that can change it? And that will help us to determine which ones get to the top of the pile, which have the biggest business impact, and which ones perhaps are lower down the priority list. But then we've also got a roster of agencies that help support us. And if it's something that we perhaps don't have time to do, we'll recommend, based on that research question, actually these are the experts in this area. We recommend you reach out to them, and we can help you with the brief and with bringing that back in, but we recommend you reach out to them to help.
So solid, and of course, starting with the objective is soul food. Allison, I think over the years, I've heard you speak on numerous occasions about the shiny thing. And I think now that, as Johnny said earlier, our time is now, we are front and center, I think that means there's just more shiny things flickering ever so brightly. So, you know, for all of the good that AI is, it has some pitfalls too. How do you coach and manage your teams to navigate those, and what does that process look like for you?
That tendency to magpie around the newest technology, to use a very British reference, is really strong. And it's actually something that I think I've found myself struggling with over the course of my career, because you get excited. In fact, that was one of the conversation topics on the panel earlier. It's really, you look at something like a ChatGPT and it feels like magic at first, and then you dig into it and understand how it works. So I think for me and for H&K more broadly, you know, the advice that we give to clients, and certainly the advice we try to follow ourselves, is to start with the problem we're trying to solve. So very much not dissimilar to you. Think about what it is that we're approaching. So whether that's how do you optimize the production of a press release, or how do you optimize the insights journey so that you can support the creative strategy, start there, understand the problem, break down the process that sits underneath that, because I think so much of us just do these things day to day that we actually don't think about the number of steps involved, even in something as simple as writing a press release, right? When we broke that down, we got to about 20 steps very quickly, and that was out without going into the minutiae of it. Then understanding, is the process working right now, or is it broken? Because we need to fix it before we start to think about where you might inject AI. And then, if you fix the process and you're happy with it, then understanding where technology or data or AI might augment the human so that you can get to a either completely new way of working or a more efficient one.
That's an incredibly powerful point when you talk about making sure that you fix it before you start to replicate or to automate or to really understand that. And I think that's where generative AI is helpful, because it's clear when programming was code and it was this kind of elusive black box over there that people either did or didn't speak that language, it was easier to have that undefined. Now that comms teams are very closely connected with those prompts, they realize it's the quality of the question that helps get them to the solution. So when you're dealing with multiple brands, multiple resources, multiple assets, I think, what does that decision tree look like as you get to if you're going to build or to buy, right? Because I think that's where people here are trying to figure out, how do I plug into what you're trying to do? Can I do that? Or if not, why not? Because I think there's also a lot of opinions of, oh, you're doing that. Well, we know what that's like to build it at scale for something else, but how do you counsel your clients, the teams internally, to really be able to assess that on a case by case?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the starting point, perhaps unsurprisingly, are the three things sitting behind us. How relevant is this to the organization? So is this something that is super critical to the way we operate as a business? Will it be something that we want in the future to have our own proprietary view on? That's where we might start to pivot into more of a build mentality. There's obviously the question of value, and for us as an agency, obviously that's going to be a question of, is this something that will be either a revenue generator or an efficiency driver? And is it going to drive value for our clients? Because actually, I think all of us have probably gone down that rabbit hole before of getting really excited about something, and then realizing that actually it's not that interesting. It's not addressing the problems that people have. And then, third, how can you start to evaluate the impact that decision is going to make? And whether you're buying or building are actually a little bit of both, because I think in truth it's more of a three-legged stool than a binary decision. Understanding the impact that you're going to get to at the end of the day, perhaps like Professor McNamara was saying, starting there and working your way back is a really useful technique.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's that piece of, you enter into it with that enthusiasm, thinking we're solving for something, and you become a project manager. And that may not be the skill set that you have that makes it even more painful, right? I was like, this is not what I signed up for. How do I get out of this now? But Kyle, I want to start with you on this one, and just, when you're looking at the scalability of things, obviously there is either some building of the team to be able to do that, for that resource allocation, where does that come from? Or when you're bringing in consultants to do that, like, what is that? How do you manage that project? Do you have internal project managers? Again, it goes back to, because hiring data people and managing data people, insights and analysts is a very, and programmers and developers is a very different skill than looking at data and getting insights. So what does that look like at Shell for you as you guys make that evaluation?
Yeah, so I come at it from a slightly different perspective to Allison, because nothing that I do is a revenue generator. It's an in-house team, so we are supporting many different functions, but we're a cost center. We're not selling that onto the market. So when sort of assessing whether we, and not only that actually, also we have some really, really super smart people in AI, in IT, in programming, but also I'm competing for that resource with other departments in the business. So, and unfortunately, although the value of what we do is incredible, there is far more value in Shell's AI team looking at how they can optimize maintenance schedules on assets, because you could be talking hundreds, if not billions of dollars in potential savings in doing that compared to my use cases. So I am at the bottom of the pile for those things. But when we're assessing whether, for example, to scale a team, we need to think about what the long-term value of that is and what we would need to get it up to speed. So if I give an example about, what are we now? We're now 2024. So as it was about 5 years ago, we started on this journey of trying to integrate more and more insight into the team. And back then, actually, I was in the insights team, there were only 3 of us. And now we're about 12. Don't quote me if I've forgotten anybody. About 12. But when we set about that, we wanted to integrate data and insights into all of our processes within the corporate relations function. We wanted to scale up our analytics in digital, so incorporating things like web and search data. And we built a plan of how to do that. But then we had to think, well, how do we staff that from our 3 people? How do we staff that? So we partnered with a consultancy that helped us, and originally brought in quite a few people to do that. We built training materials, we built process frameworks, and then we built pilot case studies working with different parts of the business to show the impact of analytics. And then as time went on, we were able to figure out, okay, how much of this do we need long term? How much of this do we need ongoing? What is an essential skill that we need in-house? And so as we developed, for example, training materials, it went from creating those training materials to just maintaining them. So that requirement reduced. And we slowly reduced reliance on those consultants that came in to help us. And then the roles, in effect, that we were left with, that were doing the real sort of heavy-hitting business impact stuff, helping people within the function to make better decisions, we kept those. And over time, we've transitioned those in-house, because if we've had them for 5 years, we probably need that skill set ongoing, and we want to retain those staff as well. So we've started to bring some of them in-house.
Allison, obviously, Kyle's working for a single brand. You're working across multiple brands. What are some of those considerations in scalability and the requirements that your team's facing to make it relevant and having that value?
Well, I think that's a really good point. It's an easy trap to fall into, to not actually think beyond that sort of 12-month horizon if you are going to go into a build mindset, particularly for those of us in agency land who are used to finding partners, kind of starting at a running sprint and just going, actually thinking at a horizon that's a bit longer term. I think for us, obviously, language is massive. We really have to be mindful about knowing at least what the limitations of a tool are going to be, whether that's something that we are partnering or buying, or if it's something we're building in-house. And then the second piece is the kinds of skill sets that we're going to need. And I think this is a challenge many of us are now facing, because suddenly we've gone from being users of tools to building things in-house, which means you need to think about the long-term maintenance. You need to have engineers on staff. You need to have data scientists who are going to think about what you can do next with that data and the data lakes that we're starting to build. So, it's that forward-looking piece where you're kind of always trying to say 6 months or longer ahead of yourself. That is a real step change, I think, for us.
So a little bit of a bonus question, but does this process give you a greater appreciation for maybe the aspirational capacity of tools than the actual application and capacity of tools? Has that changed your perspective at all when you're kind of interviewing and qualifying them as well?
That is an interesting question. I think I have always sat, and we talked about this a little bit last night, I have always sat with a healthy skepticism when I meet with anyone. And I mean that in the most kind of positive way, because I'm super interested in understanding how something works, and I'm not interested in being sold what it will do in a year, and I try not to do the same thing when I'm thinking about what it is that we're building in-house, because it's much easier to actually say, well, here's what it does now, and we can talk together about what it might do. And those kind of partnerships are actually where we've seen sort of the longer term relationships, whether that's with our clients or with our data partners. So being honest and upfront about what something can and can't do and what kind of technology it is, particularly now. I mean, we heard Maya talk about it earlier. There's such an explosion in AI, and that's not even a term that's agreed from an academic perspective. There's no line where AI starts, where ML is. At least if we can be transparent with each other, I think we'll get a lot further faster.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of collective sighs of reliefs in the room, too, of thinking, okay, so we are in this together. And I think you are a curious mind. The healthy skepticism is very good, but always very curious, which helps get to that information. Kyle, I'll start with you. Rent or own, you've talked a little bit about it, what's that long-term value, but when do you start assessing that? I mean, is that something without having that expertise in-house that you can reasonably assess for even a 12 to 18-month horizon? Or is it something that not needs to be that marker at 12 months of here's where we are and here's where that rent or buy is really going to be a value? And if white label options are a possibility, right? What are some of the criteria that people need to know and understand around confidentiality? I mean, because I think especially in your industry where it's very heavily regulated too, there are other nuances to that I think have to be considered in who you're partnering with and what that looks like if you're just putting your brand on it.
Yeah. So we, as a team, I'm not too interested in whether something is Shell branded or branded by somebody else. Actually, because if it's from a third party, used across multiple big brands with other endorsements, actually it's far better. It has credibility. So I've worked with a number of people that are in the room today, and that lends credibility, right? If those solutions are used by many people. So, but we do look for some, because of our industry, we look for partners that really want to work with us on some of these challenges. And if I take something like social listening, we partner with Ipsos Synthesio for social listening, and they're really good at tailoring that to Shell's data privacy requirements. And that's one of the huge things that's really important for us when we're choosing a partner, that they're willing to do that. There's a lot of gray areas, and Christoph Dietz yesterday talked a bit about copyright and that sort of thing. And when you're in a sector like ours, or frankly in many sectors, you can't operate in a gray area. You have to operate on the right side. And so in some cases, we will need to ask our partners to do things that, typically they may say, well, 90% of my clients use it and it's fine. But actually in our sector, we're not taking that risk. We need express consent for everything that we're doing. And we need vendors that can help us do that. So, part of actually the benefit of working with, of the buy point of working with other vendors is that they've already done a lot of that due diligence. They have the right processes in place. They have the relationships with X or Meta or some of the news organizations, and they can do some of that work for us, which we don't have the capacity in-house to look at some of those broader challenges.
And just to stick with you for a second, I think you created a model of what that hybridization looks like. What were some of the learnings that you had there that you can share? Learnings, pitfalls, benefits that help other people avoid that were possible?
Yeah, so I would say, so Allison spoke a bit about AI, and AI is useful to us in many, many, many ways. But I'd say a different kind of AI is one of the challenges we face, which is in artificial insights. And I mean that in the sense of hollow insights, things that don't really mean anything or that we can't affect change. And one of the challenges with having more and more data and having AI there to help us surface trends is what do we then do with it? And so, when it comes to thinking about who does what part of that work, I'm really taking on do you really need to have an in-depth knowledge of Shell to be able to do that? If so, then our team in-house is best placed to do it. But actually, is it something that's more industry-focused, sector-focused, or societal challenges that we work with? Rachel from Ipsos presented earlier. We use a lot of their data. They produce data on what worries the world, societal context that we all operate in, no matter which brand you're working with. We find that hugely valuable, and it's not something that we could reproduce or would try to reproduce. Ipsos are the experts in that area, and so it makes far more sense to buy that in and work with them on it in terms of how it could help us.
Brilliant. Allison, obviously you've been taking this on to build or to partner. What's that decision tree like for you, and where have you come out on that, and what's that confidence level that they've all been perfect decisions?
All perfect decisions, definitely no wrong turns. I think we're all finding our way through things, and I would echo your point around white labeling. It's never been something that we've pursued aggressively, just because I'm much more interested in credentializing myself by the company we keep, whether that's talking about our measurement is based around the AMEC framework, or we've worked with partners like Quid to build Space Plus, or with Conversus to build trust models in social data. Talking about who we work with and why we choose those partners, I think, is an important part of the conversation. Where we've made very specific investments in the build side, it has come down to, is this something that's going to be business critical for us for the next 5 or 10 years? When we look at the importance of measurement to the industry and the need to move at the speed that our clients move, that wasn't something that we really wanted to keep outsourcing as a capability. And the future side of this, which is we want to be able to model the data. I want to be able to answer the question of how many messages is the right number? How many times have we been asked that over the course of our career? Or how can I make sure my spokesperson is cutting through the clutter? Those are the kind of things which actually, as we start to collect data from across a host of brands, a host of markets, we'll actually be able to have really clear ideas on. And it's where technology, ML or AI, is really good at that probabilistic thinking. And then, as you say, it's about taking the people on our teams and unleashing them on the why. That's, I think, for us, where we're drawing the line.
Yeah, so not an easy process or decision.
No, nor do I have like a perfect, I don't have a slide to show you that's like, here is our decision tree. And if you type 1 or 2, then you'll get it. It's not like a quiz in a 17 magazine, to use a more American reference.
Yeah.
And you can change, right? You don't have to stick with your decision. The decision that you made 5 years ago is not necessarily the one that you'll make right now, because the world is changing so quickly, and the rate of technology is changing so quickly. So, where we don't have the expertise in, for example, large language models, at least for our use case, because I'm far down that value chain, as I mentioned earlier, we'll work with partners who do have that expertise to bring it in.
So I'm going to hold the last question so we stay on time, because it is a competition. Asking each of you, now that you've gone through this process and you're going through this process continually, obviously with a greater appreciation for all of those elements, what's a gap that you can identify that if you had unlimited resources and unlimited time that would be all dedicated to something, what's the problem that you wish was more of a universal problem, not like a client-by-client problem, that you believe could be solved, you just don't have the resources or the equity to do it, but someone who is applying it to a larger scalability in some of these services might be able to partner with you on something like that? That's the bonus question.
Good Lord, Jonah, what a question.
This is your Christmas list opportunity in May. Give people a chance. I'll start with you, Kyle.
I would say with the pace of change, we've talked about some of the sort of commoditization of some of that initial sort of data collection, creation, as AI creates those opportunities. So the challenge there is not to just reduce cost, it's to increase, actually, the time that we spend on pulling out the why. And, if any of you have worked with me in the past, whilst I've been at Shell, I sometimes challenge some of our partners, say, actually, should I reallocate some of my budget? So reallocate it to more senior people pulling out the right insights than some of the data commodities. So I would say focus on what your strength is and build that.
And yeah, I suppose I don't have a perfect answer for this. I'd want more time to think about it. But, a lot of the power that we're seeing right now is our ability to integrate multiple data sets. And a lot of the challenge in that is, even when you have the best API in the world, it will be structured differently than every other data that you have. Something that actually helps us get to past that cleansing phase faster would be very novel. It's a super technical response to a question that has a really open door, but actually that's the pain point a lot of the time, is getting past that initial build.
This was not rehearsed, but I love these answers, because so if there was a session where you were going to be able to kind of learn about how is your data AI ready and fixing data quality issues coming up momentarily, that could really start to bridge the gap for you. Is that something that's possible?
It's funny. If you had that session, I would definitely stay and listen to it.
Then you're going to love it. You don't have to go far. Thank you. Special round of applause for Allison and Kyle for your time and for sharing.